Alexander Bazhenko. People are killed again in Zhanaozen. Family values. From Minsk to London, Bakiyevs are back in spotlight. The new wave. The main economic goal of Akhmetov's cabinet is the second wave of privatization. From state oligarchical capitalism to popular capitalism. Feast must go on. Quite simply, there isn't enough room for posh Kazakh weddings. Hello, I'm Asylbek Abdulov and you're watching Vlast KZ on KpLus channel. Uralsk journalist and civil activist Lukhpan Akhmedyarov received an award from Reporters Without Borders in Washington, D.C. The Peter Makler's Prize is given to journalists for honest and courageous work in countries with suppressed freedom of speech. Lukhpan survived an armed attack this spring, being shot twice with a traumatic gun and then stabbed multiple times. The attempt on his life was linked by many with his work. However, the investigation considered it just a domestic crime.
Покушения в обществе связали с его профессиональной деятельностью. Следствие списало все на бытовуху. В те же дни, когда уральские врачи спасали жизнь Lukhpana.
Back when doctors fought for Lukhpan's life, observers of the trial in Oktober were shocked by a confession of Alexander Bazhenko, a witness on the case of Zhanaozen oil workers. The 20-year-old man who grew up in the orphanage said he was forced to slander defendants through tortures of the case investigators. This way he exposed the ordinary fascism of Kazakh police in Zhanaozen. This happened in late April.
Фашизм казахских полицейских в Зhanaozene. Это было в конце апреля. На прошлой неделе, 11 октября, Александр был убит.
Last week, on October 11, Alexander was murdered. The opposition assumes that he was eliminated because he was an inconvenient witness in the case of 37 oil workers. The police statement on the incident was short and predictable as headlines of state-run media, hooliganism. The public has already fed reports about suspects' arrests, and it is clear that the criminal case will have a familiar outcome.
Очевидным, на мой взгляд, сейчас кажется еще одно обстоятельство.
Another circumstance appears to be quite clear. Alexander, after his stunning appearance in court and following interviews, was unfortunately forgotten by everyone, including us, journalists, civil society activists, and opposition leaders. We all have been too busy with the trials that were held one after another in Oktober. Only police who tortured Alexander in Zhanaozen prison kept Bazhenko well in mind. He was held hostage by his principals in his own hometown of Zhanaozen. He had nowhere to go and run. According to some reports in recent months, Bazhenko has been hiding near the settlement in a steppe shack, fearing reprisals from his confessions in court. Back then he exposed the bitter truth about the December events, and now he became a victim himself. In his only interview, defenseless and at the same time fearless, Alexander said, "I will also have to stand before Lord. What will I tell him then?"
Я тоже стану перед Господом. Что я тогда ему скажу?
Правда придется. Простите меня. Простите. И у вашего сына...
Forgive me. I will keep asking your son and your children for forgiveness until you find mercy in your hearts. It is not hard for me to apologize. Please forgive me.
Я всегда буду извинения просить. Это мне не тяжело. Простите меня.
This is how Alexander Bazhenko will be remembered. A man who could not overstep the law and defame the innocent. A person for whom conscience and sympathy were more important than fear of death. On October 7th, Alexander's body was found near the restaurant Khan Shatiri. According to official theory, Alexander, who was drunk at the time, walked in the nearby store. Two customers there were 30 cents short for their purchases, and Bazhenko offered to pay for them. Young men did not appreciate the gesture and waited for him outside, where they beat him up and fled the scene. The staff of the local police station refused to comment the incident on camera. Asyam Kinjabayeva knew Alexander Bazhenko way before he faced cameras for the first time in the Oktober court. Shortly after Zhanaozen massacre on December 16th, her father Bazarbai Kinjabayev returned home in a bloodied shirt. He spent several days in the detention center and managed to tell his family about the torture he endured in prison. He also told his daughter that Alexander helped him to get on his feet after being beaten up and helped to put on the clothes. A few days later, Bazarbayev died from received beatings, but Yelena Kostyuchenko, a prominent Russian reporter, managed to record his testimonies of abuse. witness. She later quoted them during the hearings in the European Parliament. Asem, the daughter of Bazarbayev Kinjabayev, says she has been receiving phone threats. He told the truth at the trial and he believed they will come after him. It did happen and he was murdered. What if someone else gets killed now? Why does a man die for truth? What if something will happen to me now? I do not know what to say and my mother is sick. Here, Alexander Bazhenka is crying with remorse. Initially, he served as a witness for the prosecution in the case of 37 oil workers, where the defendants were returned into delinquents. Bazhenka testified via Skype against Janat Morinov using the alias of Kairat Alaspayev. Then, Alexander claims he could not bear the lie and came to court with repentance. There, with tears in his eyes, Alexander withdrew all of his prior testimonies. At this point, Bazhenka turned from an anonymous prosecution witness into one of the key witnesses for the defense. In his first and only interview, the 20-year-old man told reporters that he personally heard how policemen bragged they received order to open fire at protesters directly from the president. I will recognize the policeman if I see his face. He said that order came down from the president. I told him to forget about the president, but since they torture and beat me, I will later expose everyone, and I will not leave it this way. Bazhenka could not be left alone after that. Public observer Yerlan Kaliyev cast doubt on the official theory of Alexander's murder. He emphasizes that Alexander was a deeply religious Muslim, which actually led to his public repentance. Thus, Bazhenka could not be in a state of intoxication as claimed by the police. He accepted Islam despite his young age. He did not abuse alcohol. He was a pious man. Usually similar attempts or criminal incidents are linked with victims' occupations. The fact that he stayed away from these things suggests that it was some kind of revenge, but that assumption. Yerlan Kaliyev attended the memorial service in Almaty. Not more than a dozen people showed up to commemorate Alexander, but on the day of his funeral, candles in his memory were also lit in Berlin, Prague, Uralsk, and Karaganda. His only fault was that he told the truth. I do not believe in the version with these 30 cents that served as a reason for the fight, assault, and battery. I do not believe that it was a regular crime. The case of 37 oil workers has to do something with his murder. It is hard to tell the truth about Janauzian. Galima Giliuov quoted the testimonies about tortures that Alexander gave in court at the recent human rights session in Warsaw. He said that Bazhenka was a very inconvenient witness, and his story was a direct illustration of the fact that most testimonies in the case of 37 oil workers were extorted under torture. This way, it is clear that there was a motive to eliminate Bazhenka, since he served as an important witness who was ready to speak about the events. The authorities believe otherwise. Witnesses have not spoken their last words in the case yet. We have not heard the last of them yet. If something happened to a witness during the trial, then we could have said there was a motive. Otherwise, the judge has already announced the verdict, and people were convicted, so it does not make sense. Following Bazhenka's testimonies, Janat Morinov received a 2-year sentence, but was pardoned and released in the courtroom. After that, Alexander did not give any interviews, refused to even meet with reporters, and admitted over the phone that he is simply afraid for his life. Still, he told everything in that one interview he did give. More threats are yet to come, but I will endure them. I will stand until the end. Alexander was buried according to Muslim rites. He died as an honest man, just like he foresaw, and Kazakhstan just lost another decent person.
Убийство Александра Баженко – еще одна отметина политического режима.
The murder of Alexander Bazhenka is another imprint left by the political regime in our lives. Similar to Janauzian violence, it is more than just a crime. It's a mistake, and quite clearly, it is not the last one at that. The Janauzian syndrome is lasting, versatile, and irreversible. It results in deaths, as in the case of Bazhenka, or an alleged escape of Aslan Musin, the head of the audit committee and former president's chief of staff. Rahat Ali, former Kazakhstan's ambassador in Austria and ex-president's son-in-law, said in his recent interview to KpLus that Musin became a scapegoat of the tragedy in Mangistau. In any case, this might be only the beginning, and in the near future we might well be witnessing the dusk of many senior careers.
Having served less than a month as head of the accounts committee, Aslan Musin departed from Kazakhstan to go on another vacation. His new staff members try not to act too surprised. Aslan Musin is on vacation. There is no such information. He is officially on vacation as agreed upon with the presidential administration. Up until September 30th, Musin served as chief of staff, a second post after the president in the Kazakh vertical of power. On the day Nursultan Nazarbayev dismissed Aslan Musin, Musin Jr. published his own ordinary miracle on the Kazakh website YouVision.
Истина, правда, знание, смысл, суть, существование, действительность, реальность, бытие.
Truth, meaning, conscience, reasons, being. All of us understand, or rather come to understand these words when we hear them. But what stands behind them? Do they have a solid footing?
Есть ли у них твердая основа? Что такое истина?
In a series of films on Islam and the Holy Book of Quran, Muhsin's son Asylbek plays the role of a host and philosopher, preaching a special form of Islam. Towards the end, you get an idea as if Asylbek is seriously interested in creating a new Islamic state. Coincidentally, he mentions in one of his interviews that his movement has gathered around 70,000 followers in Kazakhstan. Objectively speaking, around 70 to 80,000, although some claim our audience reaches 100,000. But it is easy to understand since our ideas are attractive and people accept them easily. After all, we are saying almost exactly what the Prophet Muhammad said in his time. In the context of these quotes, a series of terrorist acts and elimination of young men in Atarau region, western Kazakhstan, officially labeled terrorists, easily comes to mind. The official muftiate labeled followers of the Neo-Kharijite movement extremist. Atarau imams pointed out that these so-called terrorists reject traditional madhab school of law, as well as state laws and the official clergy. They can be labeled Neo-Kharijites, a radical sect that sprang up in the Caliph Ali era. These people held radical views. They demonstrated against Islam, against Muslims, against the ruler, and now I can call these people Neo-Kharijites, in other words, a radical sect. The Naib Imam noted that young people from age 20 and up started taking active interest in Islam within the last 5 years. However, the knowledge that they gain comes from dubious sources on the internet. If you enter Asylbek Muhsin on Google, the search results will include many different video and written interviews of the former Chief of Staff's son. What Muhsin Jr. does there, for the most part, is preach. Frankly, head of the Muslim Union, Murat Talibekov, says the young man is too fast to take on the role of the Messiah. First is his age. He is 30 years old. Second, his recent conversion into Islam. And third, his father's high rank is not forever. I think the real number of his supporters will become known after his father falls into disfavor. His political influence has already changed. When the aura of power is gone, then I think the true number of adherents will be revealed. I think a lot of them position themselves with this movement out of certain material interests. How has Aslan Muhsin's status changed in the elite hierarchy remains an open question. Clearly, he was demoted. According to insiders' information, the head of accounts committee is not just on vacation, he has left for Germany for treatment. This, in spite of the head of state's ban on state officials' treatment abroad. To be sure, politician Bulat Abilov does not consider Muhsin's departure an escape. I think the president foresaw the situation with Aslan Muhsin, and the fact that his family is here makes him a hostage. Even if he has any designs to leave the country, he will not be able to do so. He will return from treatment in Germany and resume work. Former Kazakhstan ambassador to Austria, Rahat Aliyev, on the contrary, says chances of Aslan Muhsin's return are slim. In an interview to independent journalist Alexander Narodetsky, the president's former son-in-law informs that there are active discussions over which role will Muhsin occupy in the higher echelons of power. Aliyev proposes that, considering that Muhsin has brought his family and close ones out of the country, he will no longer cooperate with the Nazarbayev regime. It is not a coincidence that the former head of Atarau region brought his family to London, and Mr. Muhsin also brought his family to America, and his daughter lives in Switzerland. His children are charged with criminal crimes. As a clear-headed man, he is choosing a way out of Nazarbayev's manhunts. The Kazakh president's former son-in-law contends that after Aslan Muhsin, other high-ranking officials will be demonstratively punished so that information on who gave the order to shoot in Zhanaozian does not leak out. Former Prime Minister Karim Masimov, Chief of Staff Muhsin, NSC Chairman Kasimov, Attorney General Daobayev, and Chairman of the Supreme Court, they all must understand that Nazarbayev will purge them sooner or later. I would say he is conducting a mass purge to hide the real motives of his genocide. Akurda would beg to differ. Terrorism in Kazakhstan is bred and cultivated inside prison cells and carries a foreign trail. Last week, in an interview to KTK television channel, presidential advisor Yermohamed Yurtizbayev admitted the situation arose because of confusion with those responsible for the penitentiary system, which switched hands between the MIA and Justice Ministry several times over the years. Shaheeds and Wahhabis penetrated the penitentiary system, propagating radical and extremist movements. This combination produced inflammable human material, ready to commit terrorist acts. People came out of there brainwashed, amassing gangs, and noticed that their actions were aimed directly directly at law enforcement authorities. Chairman of Kazakhstan's Muslim Union, Murat Talibekov, on the contrary, is convinced that religious motives in the last terrorist acts are not related to crime and did not spring up on its own accord. Talibekov claims the ruling elite is attempting to use religious fanatics in their internal struggle, which is very dangerous for all of Kazakhstan. They are very easy to manipulate using religious rhetoric. It is an effective tool in achieving certain political goals, since Islam at its core does not rule out violence. It is justified if it is done for a noble cause. Which cause can be labeled noble? This is akin to the rhetorical question from Asylbek Musin's film, What is Truth? According to rumors, Musin Jr. is currently abroad like his father. However, he actively continues to release films in search of new supporters for the form of monotheism he promotes.
Бывшая кыргызская правящая фамилия вновь оказалась в центре международного внимания.
The former Kyrgyzstan's ruling family is yet again in the international spotlight. Maxim Bakiyev, an entrepreneurial son of the ousted president Kurmanbek Bakiyev, was arrested in London on request of two governments, those of the USA and Kyrgyzstan. The notorious son was later released on bail, with a court hearing scheduled for December 7th, while all the hate of the Bakiyevs from both sides of the Atlantic.
А теперь вот и американскому правительству.
The smoke grenade went off, and then we saw him lying on the ground along with a few others. On that rainy Wednesday, Joldosh, the son of Nuria Aydabasunova, came to the city square. Along with a dozen thousands of others, he wanted to cast away those who were robbing the nation from his country. They successfully managed to do so. However, that day will always be remembered as a day of mourning in Kyrgyzstan. There were 87 casualties at the Alato square on April 7th. Nuria's son Joldosh was one of them. All those who lost their sons on that day, any mother would tell you that Bakiyev's family is to blame. Everyone, including myself, cursed them and continued to do so, and yet they are still safe and sound. The curses of mothers seems to start working. On October 12, 2012, Maxim Bakiyev, the son of the ex-president, was detained by police in London. In fact, this was requested by the United States. Maxim Bakiyev, the younger son of former president of Kyrgyzstan Kurmanbek Bakiyev. In 2009, at age 31, he was appointed the head of his father's election campaign during the presidential elections. He was also the head of Central Agency for Development, Investments and Innovations in Kyrgyzstan since October 29, 2009 to April Revolution of 2010. He controlled all financial flows in the country. After the fall of his father's regime, he fled to England and was awaiting to receive requested political asylum. In Kyrgyzstan, Maxim Bakiyev is accused of abuse of office, accounting fraud and misuse of government credit granted by Russia. The exact amount of inflicted damage to the budget of Kyrgyzstan is still investigated. Yet one thing is clear, it is estimated to hundreds of millions of dollars. Nevertheless, the key reason for a major dislike of Maxim Bakiyev by people of Kyrgyzstan is a 1 cent tax. According to cellular service providers, with every phone call made in Kyrgyzstan, 1 cent was getting in Bakiyev's pocket. The taxes were imposed on each successful dialed phone call. Even some of MPs were trying to fight this endorsement. Dear colleagues, I urge you, let's not use the cellular communication at least for a day. Let's watch who wins. If the government cannot hear us and the cellular operators cannot hear the government, then it is necessary to break the circle. Considering that there are 5 million people in Kyrgyzstan and 80% of the population was already using mobile devices, making calls more than once a day, we can only guess how much money did Maxim make in over 2 months. However, the infamous young man made himself known not only in his mother country. In London, Maxim was arrested for transgressions committed against the United States. US authorities accused Maxim Bakiyev of making millions of dollars of transactions with shares on the New York Stock Exchange and Nasdaq using illegally obtained information while in the UK.
The U.S. Embassy in Bishkek confirms that the U.S. Department of Justice has a criminal case against Mr. Bakiyev based on alleged violations of U.S. law. The United States has requested extradition of Mr. Bakiyev from the United Kingdom to face trial in U.S. federal court on a serious charge of conspiracy to commit securities fraud and obstruction of justice. If convicted, he could face a lengthy prison term.
However, Maxim Bakiev was immediately released on bail of £250,000, awaiting the trial. In December of 2012, the British justice is to decide whether to extradite Maxim to US authorities. Nobody is ever going to bring him back to Kyrgyzstan. They're talking about the fraud that took place after the April events. Therefore, whatever happens before April is not going to be of their concern, and they will simply wash off their hands then. The former Prosecutor General Baybolov shares his opinion on why do the US need Maxim Bakiev now. He's convicted that the key reason is buried in the US military base in Kyrgyzstan. Putin's recent visit to the Kyrgyz Republic and the visit of the President Atambayev to Turkey became the answer to the question whether the US airbase remains in Kyrgyzstan. Until recently, they were confident that they will manage to come to an agreement. Therefore, now they are going to use the information they currently have and the information which they would most likely receive from Maxim. This primarily has to do with Kumtor deposits and US airbase, the rent fees. According to Baybolov, the US will try to keep their airbase in the country, blackmailing Kyrgyz authorities with incriminating information gathered against them. He is confident that this will be a chance to avoid a long prison term for Maxim. In the meantime, it doesn't seem possible to interview Maxim Bakiev himself. His lawyer refused to make comments as well.
It's in relation to Mr. Bakiev. I've got no comment to make, I'm afraid. If you want to send me an email, I may be able to respond to it at some point in the future. No, I'm afraid not. Sorry. Many thanks. Bye-bye.
In the meantime, the Kyrgyz authorities stated that they're trying their best to bring the younger son of the second president of Kyrgyzstan back to the country. The government is working on this. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is working at full speed to have Maxim Bakiev extradited to us. Yet we face difficulties. As you know, the British laws are very difficult and complex. He has already been punished by becoming a fugitive. Perhaps he should return everything he stole. Otherwise, I don't want him back here. The Bakiev's family left a lot of property which belongs to them legally and illegally, while it comes handy to certain authorities. But if we would return everything back to the country, this could mean some economic benefit. On December 7, 2012, the Court of UK decided whether to deny or grant the request of US for the transfer of Maxim Bakiev under the jurisdiction of American justice. Only then Kyrgyzstan will be able to negotiate with Washington for Maxim's extradition to his homeland. However, even if Maxim Bakiev is brought back to Kyrgyzstan, it doesn't mean he won't be able to escape once again. His uncle Ahmad Bakiev managed to do so. He was held in jail and then transferred allegedly for treatment to a hospital where he easily managed to escape from. Next on Vlast KZ. The new wave. The main economic goal of Akhmetov's cabinet is the second wave of privatization. From state oligarchical capitalism to popular capitalism. Feast must go on. Quite simply, there isn't enough room for posh Kazakh weddings. Stay with us. Vlast KZ will return with more in a couple of minutes.
Главные события в Казахстане. Достоверные факты. Эксклюзивные комментарии. Читайте в Казахстане информационно-аналитический портал «Республика». Чтобы обойти блокировки, воспользуйтесь доменом respublicas.info. Вы окажетесь на так называемом прокси-портале. Специально разработанные канадскими специалистами по интернет-технологиям, прокси-порталы помогают пользователям получать информацию в тех странах, где блокируют интернет-ресурсы. В Китае, Иране, в Казахстане. Вы принимаете условия использования системы и попадаете на страницу информационно-аналитического портала «Республика». Материалы интернет-портала также доступны пользователям всемирной сети Facebook. facebook.com/respublica.kaz. Если вы хотите поделиться информацией, вам есть что рассказать, звоните в редакцию «Республики». Наши телефоны в Казахстане +7 727 273 92 95, в Москве +7 495 621 87 03.
Новости Казахстана на казахском языке смотрите в 21:00 и далее каждый нечетный час. Новости Казахстана на русском языке в 22:00 и далее каждый четный час. Новости Казахстана на английском языке смотрите в 16:30, 17:30, 18:30 и 19:30 со вторника по субботу. Время Астаны. Изготовление и размещение рекламы на канале KplusTV.
Политическому советнику президента Иртысбаеву
Yermuhamed Yildizayev, the president's political advisor, has been recently pointing out typical shortcomings of the government and the authorities' failures in certain situations. For instance, Yildizayev referred to the infamous former mayor of Zhanaozen and more recently the failure of the initiative to set up a social entrepreneurship corporation.
А вдогонку досталось и экс-премьеру Масимову.
The former Prime Minister Masimov also received his portion of criticism. The advisor called excessive intervention in the market economy the main shortcoming of Masimov's economic policy. The state appeared to be engaged in virtually all areas of the economy, stifling competition and entrepreneurship. Therefore, the main objective of Akhmetov cabinet is the development of small and medium-sized businesses and implementation of the second wave of privatization. Independent experts didn't find the privatization the objective necessity and say that, on the contrary, it is necessary to nationalize strategic sectors and industries privatized during the first wave.
Nursultan Nazarbayev is headed to Europe next week in search of investments, reports the website invest.gov.kz. The Kazakh leader will visit Austria and the Czech Republic to attend business forums. Among the invited guests, dozens of manufacturing companies.
In the birthplace of apples and tulips, where technology unites people.
This promotional video may be shown to foreign businessmen in between sessions. Its message, invest in Kazakhstan, for Kazakhstan means political stability and 99 elements in the chemical table.
Is to create.
While Nazarbayev was getting ready to persuade investors, the opposition camp was busy persuading each other, demanding a national referendum on the issue of nationalization. Something around 40,000 objects were transferred to private hands from 1991 to 2005. But for us, the important issue is privatization of individual projects, when giants and flagships of our economy were handed into private hands. Almost simultaneously, political advisor to the president Yermuhamed Yildizayev makes another statement. In his words, the new government's main objective is the second wave of privatization. At the moment, the state almost killed competition in the market economy. Small and medium business needs room to breathe. The second wave of privatization is, of course, big business. We are expecting it to come not only with big money, but with more effective management. Aygul Solovyova, member of Economic Reform and Regional Development Committee in the Kazakh Parliament, says the state has never been a good manager, accepts economic mistakes, noting that bad experience is also an experience. Notes one of the biggest mistakes in the 90s was not taking into account the Kazakh context. The first wave of privatization was born out of the fact that those who announced it did not understand what it is completely. Those who bought these PIK groups had no idea whatsoever. The so-called first wave of privatization spread across the country in the 90s. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Kazakhstan was in dire need of money to develop its economy. At first, the entire population was offered to purchase manufacturing plants. Every Kazakh citizen received 100 coupons for a certain plant, but without instructions on how to turn these coupons into real money. As a result, the first privatization is still associated with fraud among the population. In the meantime, officials began to understand that the local population was not enough, so they approached foreign investors. In November 1994, President Nazarbayev decides to transfer management of the largest mining, chemical, and metallurgical industries to foreign companies. In the words of Serikbalsin Abdildin, Kazakhstan's Communist Party calls it a waste of public property. The story with privatization of Karmetkombinat serves as a classic example. Even MPs themselves ask not to sell the flagship of the national industry where the president himself spent his formative years. We must not accept the sale of leading manufacturing plants that are the pride of our national economy. Thank you for your attention. Nonetheless, Karmetkombinat switched hands 3 times, and in the end landed in the hands of Indian magnate Lakshmi Mittal, cleared off debts entirely. The old technical base in need of investments rears its ugly head year in, year out. Over the last decade, more than 100 workers died in Karagandar region. They say the middlemen in the deal that landed Mittal the company were Alexander Mashkevich and Prime Minister Kazhageldin. Now it is almost impossible to find out at what price exactly was Karmet Kombinat, currently known as ArcelorMittal, purchased. Same with Kazakhmys. These so-called investors drove up the scale of corruption in Kazakhstan exponentially. If officials received bribes in the tens of thousands, a million tops, then after their arrival, the numbers went up to tens and hundreds of millions. As it happened in the 1990s, these were simply camouflaged Kazakh citizens, hence the term foreigners in quotation marks. Remember Japan Chrome Corporation? The Japanese have never heard of it. The Japanese embassy came out with an official statement that it had nothing to do with Japan. We privatized our electric stations, electric power transmission, municipal and urban engineering, etc. As a result, we got what we have now, a complete collapse of municipal and urban engineering, an annual increase in prices and tariffs for electricity, heating and water. Among the positives in that privatization is the growth of industry in Kazakhstan, note the experts. The current equivalent of almost $2 billion was raised, lifting the country on its feet. Aygul Solovyova and her colleagues from the lower house are preoccupied not with the past mistakes in the economy, but with current ones. The national IPO, which was meant to start this year, will most likely be postponed indefinitely. National stocks, which were meant to be available to everyone, turned out to be not too available after all. Officials claimed 250,000 people as potential stockholders at first, then half as much, while head of the National Bank Grigory Marchenko recently surprised everyone. Stocks would be available to 20,000 Kazakhstanis. If this block of shares goes exclusively to the haves, then social stratification will only increase. That is our whole concern. In between household chores and research activity, economist Kanat Bedintayev carefully studies local officials' speeches and accentuates good management over form of ownership. After all, who cares who drives the garbage out of the yard as long as the results are there? Maybe this should be privatized. Kanat Bedintayev, head of Center for Research, considers nationalization a populist idea. As for the new wave of privatization, concludes it will go on a regional and municipal level, bypassing national companies. Believes the national IPO will take place. The process will be streamlined by mid-level officials when the law on the declaration of income is ratified. If I have some leftovers from financial kickbacks, etc., then what do? I take a few retired people, give them money, they buy these stocks, and give the money back to me on the counter market. In other words, this capital is legalized. Remember the movie Mother Do Not Grieve? Remember how the character says the first crime wave has swept the city? Someone else says it was just the first wave, we are now in the second crime wave. Mukhtar Tayjan's good mood is easy to explain. This is one of the cases where the absurdity of the situation in the country forces one to laugh instead of cry. Numbers from economist Mukhtar Tayjan. More than 80% of private deposits belong to 1% of the population. 40% Kazakhstanis earn less than $400. More than half of 500 state joint stock companies are recording losses. 47% of the population lives in villages without cellular communication and the internet. In the economist's opinion, what should be avoided in the upcoming redistribution is the departure of so-called natural monopolies from the state sector. Railways, gas and oil pipelines and other companies in this sector should always be under government control, which is also responsible for the renewal of their infrastructure. It will solve many issues, job creation and improvements in the social sphere without any investments, believes Tayjan. We have the money, we just need the will. Roads need to be constructed, the sewage system changed, electric grids modernized. We all know this. I'm not the only one. What's stopping us? I do not know what's stopping us. Something is. Meanwhile, the second part of new privatization, according to official deadlines, should start in 2015. Its main goal is to attract global investors. The fate of the national IPO, which the government counted on to make $500 million, is unknown. In the meantime, experts believe the main condition under which the process will kick off is transparency, the same transparency which is currently lacking on the left bank of the Shem River.
Прежде чем перейдем к заключительному материалу, одна цитата.
A quote before we proceed to the last segment. Weddings and funerals are increasingly becoming a socialistic competition. People want to show each other who is richer and can hold more dazzling events. Billions of dollars are spent for this phenomenon that has become a social disease often ignored by the state and society. End quote. Why Kazakhs don't get rich with weddings as a burden. Internet newspaper Altyn Orda.
Или свадьбы как ермо. Интернет-газета Алтын Орда. Особенности национальной свадьбы в Алматы.
The average Almaty wedding without frills has a ruthless budget of about $20,000 mixed with cultural eclecticism. A modern feast is a strange fusion of national rituals and Soviet traditions, taken over by innovation and new kitsch. In any case, here's to the happiness of the newlyweds. Let them not see the burden of many loans.
За счастье молодых кредиты эту свадьбу вдаль несли.
Galimbek and his fiancée Nurgul are preparing for the most important event in their lives. The wedding was scheduled for the end of October, but Nurgul still didn't choose the dress. The groom wants to see Nurgul in traditional attire. In order to save money, they decided to rent the wedding dress. While the bride is trying on dresses, Galimbek is trying not to waste time. He chooses invitation cards and other minor items. Finally, the bride found the right wedding dress. Everything is fine and it fits perfectly, yet the price is too high. The dress itself costs $800 and $400 if you want to rent it. You'll have 1 week. This is the most expensive dress we have. White wedding dress is now an outdated tradition. The new trend is the ivory color. Luisa has been involved in this business for 5 years. She noted that in recent years, people's preferences have changed drastically. Modern brides prefer simple and plain dresses with no ruches, roses, gems and bows. Luisa's wedding parlor offers wedding gowns for no cheaper than $500. They import brands from US and the UK. However, the customers prefer to make purchases no cheaper than $4,000. Brides prefer to pay a high price, while everyone has different preferences in price range. However, in general, the more expensive the dress is, the better it is for them. They tend to choose rather expensive dresses. In the meantime, Galimbek is going to have an important meeting at the bank. Initially, the ordinary school teacher just wanted to set the table for the closest relatives and friends, but the bride's relatives rejected this idea. They demanded the real, full-fledged feast in order not to lose worse than other people. Therefore, Galimbek now has to take the bank loan to buy the dress for his bride and to organize a wedding reception. I expect to spend from $10,000 to $20,000 for this wedding. This would be rated as the average wedding reception. I've just visited the bank. Luckily, there are different loan programs, so now I'll have to collect the necessary paperwork. It is the national cuisine. The meat is served first at the wedding table. On this day, Gulnar's only son is getting married. She shows how to share the most delicious pieces of meat between guests. This is called toy bastar. The wish is to continue the feast. This doll is stuffed with the gifts. It will be given to the mother of the bride as gift symbolizing her doll-like daughter. It took much time and effort to organize the wedding reception and the food for 150 people. The wedding preparations took 3 months. Introducing the families, paying the traditional fee for the bride, coordinating the restaurant, slaughtering the horse, hiring a host. The ordinary nurse from the district hospital paid over $13,000 for her son's wedding. The parents alone cannot afford such a wedding. My relatives and my in-laws helped me. We gathered all of them for a cup of tea at our house prior to the wedding. Everyone chipped in to help out with the wedding. The groom, Neriman, and the bride, Jansaya, both are a little over 20 years of age. The wedding reception is held in due order, complying with all traditions. Trying to save some money, the parents invited the representatives of the Vital Records office to the restaurant. It's quite expensive to hold a registration ceremony at the wedding palace these days. Jasata Wedding Palace, the ceremonial registration with Mendelssohn's Wedding March would cost $750. This is an all-inclusive service. It includes the actors in national costumes, live music, video footage, photographer, the buffet hall, and tossing candies. All this would make your holiday unforgettable. At Jasatau Palace, we also organize other ceremonies aside from the weddings. Those who held their weddings ceremony here come to celebrate their silver and golden wedding anniversaries or other holidays. The limo is the most popular vehicle for holidays in Kazakhstan. Hummers, Lincolns and Chryslers. These are rented out by Zaina Akhrieva for already 8 years. Her company established 4 offices in Almaty and soon will have 1 more. When everyone is willing to spend money to have everything top-notch, this business has to be quite lucrative. TV, the bar, refrigerator, an aquarium and even a fireplace. People could only afford to rent limos for a maximum of 3 hours, whereas these days the luxury cars are rented for 7 or even 10 hours. The prices vary. The most expensive is Hummer H2 with $300 per hour. Zinaida proudly gives an example of their best order when the client paid for traffic police escort as an additional service.
Заказали 3 машины марки Infiniti X56 с камнями Swarovski.
The clients ordered 3 Infiniti SUVs with Swarovski stones and 15 wedding cortege cars. The wedding was very interesting, escorted by the traffic police. The reason behind hiring the traffic police are the heavy traffic jams.
Проехать такому кортежу без разъединения, что такого не было, естественно, они наняли эскорт такой.
The show agency Grotesque has been on the market for 12 years. Its director and leading host Alexei provides about 200 kinds of services. Aside from the restaurant and the menu, the agency provides them multilingual hosts, strip dancers, clowns, discos, video footage and even a military band. For additional prices, they may also invite foreign celebrities. According to Alexei, the average Kazakh wedding holding 100 people usually costs about $13,000. However, the demands and the tastes of clients are developing, he says. Extravaganza is in fashion these days. People are willing to spend money on exclusive shows. The trend of this year for the groom and the bride was the skydiving prior to the wedding reception. One couple ordered to hold a wedding in Egypt and we invited all the guests to the wedding party in Egyptian style. Theme weddings have been quite popular lately, including the Spanish cowboy and Hawaiian themes. People are tired of traditional weddings. Golden coins in place of candies. This feast was ordered by a businessman from Kazakhstan. The wedding took place in the most expensive hotel in Istanbul. The Kazakh ambassador Jansi Tuimenbayev was spotted at the ceremony. The famous Kazakh singer Nurlan Abdan was invited as the host at this event. Nurlan is known as prominent artist and the popular host among the Kazakhstan's elite. Last year, he hosted 13 Kazakh weddings in Germany, Dubai, Moscow and Turkey. The new trend of the Kazakh elite is not only to celebrate it in large, but prefer to do it abroad. I'm the sole artist from Kazakhstan at these weddings. The rest of them are from European countries. There were very prominent hosts here as well. Majority of the guests flew in from Kazakhstan. This was a very luxurious wedding. In the meantime, Galimbek has got 1 more week before the wedding. He's going to meet with the host of the ceremony. The entire wedding party depends on how skilled the host is. This person is a famous show host, therefore, he's not going to be cheap. He requires $1,000 for his services. The groom pays him a deposit and rushes away to collect documents for the bank. He will be able to start his own family by means of a loan. This was Vlast KZ on KplusTV channel. We review trends, highlights and personalities of the past week. Goodbye.